Christianity in the Middle East has been declining steadily since 1910. And there was a very, very sharp decline, especially after 1950. We see here in the date 1970, where there was an even stronger decline in the Middle East. So let's talk about why this is happening. Why is this happening? Well, of course, immediately after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Middle East was fragmented into different countries. So that played a role. One of the biggest things however, as of recently, that caused this very, very steep decline is the emergence of Israel and extremism that's been arising in the Middle East. And we're going to touch on both of those. Before I do that, I want to show you two different countries, or two countries here that are actually counter to the rest of the decline, which is Saudi Arabia, which had an increase, and also the United Arab Emirates, which also had an increase. A lot of it due because of the fact that they bring in a lot of foreigners, very wealthy countries as well, a lot of economic opportunities. So there's that reason. But regarding the rest of the countries, let's just be honest about it. Yesterday, Israelis are, and U.S. officials are bragging, like Randy Fine, are talking about how Christians in Bethlehem dropped from 85% to just less than 10% today. 85% back in 1950 to less than 10% today. And they're stating that it's because of Islamic extremism that's causing the decline of Christians in Bethlehem. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in Palestine and then the greater Middle East. I made a whole separate video on it yesterday, what's happening in Palestine. It's very much due to the Israeli occupation in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. You'll hear in Western media, they'll lie about it, and they'll say it's because of Muslims in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. It has nothing to do with the fact there are checkpoints and walls and settlers spitting and trying to steal their homes and kicking them out. Even though when Palestinian Christians on social media outwardly state, just publicly state, the reason they are leaving Bethlehem is because they're being persecuted by the Israeli occupation, those voices are completely ignored. It's actually interesting. Mainstream media would prefer to have a Jewish Zionist on mainstream media to talk about the decline of Christians in the Holy Land versus having the Christians in the Holy Land speak for themselves. Isn't that interesting? They'd rather have a Christian Zionist like U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, speak on why Christians in the Holy Land are declining instead of having Christians in the Holy Land speak for themselves. Isn't that interesting? But separate from what's happening in Palestine, let's talk about the rest of the Middle East, because this steep decline especially started with the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. And, this ISIS extremist group, let's talk a little bit about this. These psycho, disgusting terrorists that are going rampant in the Middle East, absolutely disgusting. They claim to be Muslim, but, every single Muslim I've ever talked to tells me that they don't represent Islam at all, and they're actually a concoction, and they don't know how the hell these people came out of nowhere. They're psychopaths. They're fringe psychopaths. And what's interesting is that all of these extremist groups arose from the power vacuums created by U.S. intervention on the behest of the Israeli lobby in the United States, bombing every single Middle Eastern country, creating power vacuums. And all of a sudden, within these power vacuums, you have these extremist groups arise, and these extremist groups take control. And after these extremist groups arise, Israel, the Israeli Mossad, and the United States fund and train those extremist groups to overthrow the next country, as happened in Syria with Operation Timber Sycamore, where the CIA was actively training ISIS fighters to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Operation Timber Sycamore, this is fact. You can search this up. This is fact. The United States and Israel train these radical groups, and they brag about it. And I've previously showed the former CIA chief in Tel Aviv, in the Tel Aviv station, bragging about the fact that they train ISIS and al-Qaeda fighters in the Middle East that are radical psychopaths, that destabilize Middle Eastern governments, that persecute minority groups in these countries, but they're trained by the United States and Israel, and they're backed by them. Where else do you think they're getting their weapons? You think their weapons are just coming out of thin air? Where else do you think they're getting them? If you mention Iran, which is absolutely incorrect, Iran actually works to defeat ISIS in its own country and then also in Iraq because of the fact that ISIS attacks Iran. ISIS attacks everybody aside from Israel, actually. And the one time that ISIS actually did attack Israel, they apologized for it. This is fact. Let me actually, a lot of my statements here, I should have had all of these things shown up on screen. So that way I don't, you guys could really fact check this myself. Here we go. Look, this is reported. ISIS fighters attacked the Israeli Defense Forces, then apologized. So again, ISIS never attacks Israel. And the reason it's important to bring this up is because when we look back at this graph here, and I could have done a much bigger deep dive on this, is that when you have these fringe groups take control in power vacuums, they immediately go after the minorities. And when they go after the minorities, the destabilization in those countries disproportionately affects the minority groups, which causes them to flee and to leave for their safety, which is why we're seeing a decline in the Middle East. Okay? That's what's going on. Now, of course, what you're going to hear from the Israelis is they're going to brag about the fact that the Israeli population in Israel proper, is increasing without recognizing the fact that they are causing the systemic persecution of Christians that are Palestinian, and those Christians that are Palestinian are fleeing. They'll never mention the fact that all of these extremist groups that arise are being trained and funded by the Israeli Mossad and the CIA that end up going after these minority groups. It's much easier actually to blame the Muslims for the decline of Christianity in the Middle East instead of the fact that the power vacuums and these extremist groups were created by the United States and Israeli Mossad. That's just matter of fact. That's just matter of fact. But it's much easier for the mainstream media to completely, hijack this for their own, for their own political agenda, which is exactly what we saw Randy Fine doing yesterday. Mike Huckabee, the current U.S. ambassador to Israel, bragged about or went on interview and stated that why does a Palestinian state have to be in the West Bank and Gaza? Why can't the Palestinian state be somewhere else like Saudi Arabia? Why can't the Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians have their own Palestinian state in Saudi Arabia? Why does it have to be here? This is the U.S. ambassador to Israel that pretends to be a Christian. He states he's a Christian Zionist, an evangelical Christian Zionist, while actively calling for the displacement of Palestinian Christians from the Holy Land. And then once those Palestinian Christians are displaced, they'll go out publicly and say, look what those Muslims did. Look at the fact that there is a decline of Christianity in the Middle East. I speak with Christians in Bethlehem all the time. I mean this. I'm constantly working with them, and I'm working with Muslims too in the Israeli-occupied West Bank in the north near Nablus. And they're telling me publicly they're brothers. There's no difference between them. They're both Palestinian. They're both Palestinian to the Israelis. They don't care who they are, and they live in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, both in Israeli occupation. You think their issue is each other and not the fact that they're living in Israeli occupation that's constantly stealing their land? If you look at the Lebanese Christian community that's been on the decline in Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country, and now it's on the decline. We're not going to at all mention the instability in Lebanon that caused groups like Hezbollah to arise. Why did Hezbollah arise in 1982? It arose in resistance to the fact that Israel went into southern Lebanon, and it emerged as a resistance to the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon, which is heavily a Shiite Muslim group. So we always look at what's going on the ground and not recognizing why the hell are they even there to begin with? Why are these extremist groups there, like ISIS? Why are these countries destabilized that are causing minorities to flee? And what was going on before that? But no, it's much easier for mainstream media to just make Israel look like it's this perfect country in the Middle East that actually cares about minorities. So, that's it for this video, guys. I could have really, probably shown a lot more evidence and made it more in depth. I've done that in previous videos regarding Christianity. I'll try to make a playlist here and include those other videos. But I just wanted to kind of give a quick summary of my thoughts. If you found this video interesting, I'd appreciate it if you click the subscribe button below and give it a thumbs up as well. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the